So I want to begin with because my presentation, lecture, when did I give a lecture? Yesterday, the day before yesterday, began with a quote from Thoreau. Could a great miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? And actually, this is a quote from Thoreau's Warden, which Stanley Cavell quotes in his essay, Warden in Tokyo, in which he is talking about the cross-cultural dimension of Thoreau's work. Why are you laughing?
Warden in Tokyo, wow.
Yeah, Warden in Tokyo, yeah. So can you think about this a bit? The first point which I want to make is lost in translation, the story of the soul search, which some of you have already mentioned. And Charlotte talks about midlife crisis, and bearing in mind that the crisis occurs in the midst of the life. And also this is the phrase from Thoreau, people are in a quiet desperation. So that it's not a dramatic, I thought Lost in Translation film is sort of less dramatic than the Babel. Because in the Babel, all those incidents and sort of horrible things happen, whereas Lost in Translation is a kind of more muted, but kind of sort of invisible crisis which people undergo. So this is the phrase from Thoreau, that people are in quiet desperation. So this is the theme which I wanted to highlight in connection with Lost in Translation. And the turnings in Bob's and Charlotte's selves are being triggered by their conversation, which I wanted to emphasize as well. Casually at the bar, sometimes seriously in the restaurant, and as they lie on the bed together, there is a mode of perfectionist conversation with no final answers. So when you think about how Bob and Charlotte were engaged in conversation on bed, they didn't necessarily try to find an answer to some specific questions, but they are sort of exchanging words each other and testing their words each other. And they become answerable to their own selves, learning how to accept one's estrangement from the world. So this is one point which I wanted to emphasize. It is through this gradual process of transformation that Bob and Charlotte, in the view of the film, arrive at the ending scene, regaining new interest and trust in the world, which Paul has just mentioned. Learning to trust themselves to the world and celebrating a rebirth of their words. So I wanted to hear your opinion about this contrast between Lost in Translation and the Babel, because I thought in the ending scene, I thought Lost in Translation is more promising and hopeful, whereas the Babel, to be honest, I couldn't find any clue of hope, because I heard Paul and you discussing this morning about the ending scene is a bit promising, but I think it's interesting to compare this ending scene, what this end, would you like to say something?
Can I say, is it word or words?
Themselves to the word and celebrating the rebirth of their words.
Their words.
Words, language, yeah. So I thought in this sense the ending scene of the Lost in Translation is more promising, and actually this hope and promise I think is one of the characteristics of American philosophy of Cavell, Thoreau, and Emerson. Lost in Translation, a story that tells us something about an alternative route and an encounter with a foreign language. So I think it's John Yu who said that probably the fact that it is Japan is not all that important, but the fact that it is very different culture is influential. So, but I still feel the fact that this film was shot in Japan, taken in Japan, that the event took place in Japan makes significant difference to suffer its impact in indirect way. This will necessarily involve one's engagement with language, not only with the foreign language, but also a more significant, perhaps, with one's native language. We are fated to be challenged by an endless call for articulating what cannot be said. So in my interpretation, in order for Bob and Charlotte to rediscover their own language, which is English, in itself requires their re-encounter with different culture, different language. That is my interpretation. And that kind of impact and effect, it was very indirect. It's not that Bob and Charlotte learned something solid from Japan or Japanese language, but this encounter in an indirect way had an effect upon their transformation. Translation is filled with paradoxes. Bob's and Charlotte's reunion at the end is a state of communion that is made possible through leaving. So I find this ending scene very paradoxical because they obviously were sort of reunited each other, I think. But then that communion and unification took place by the very fact of leaving and separation. They are remarried in separation. In response to what cannot be said in Japan, and with the cinematic effect of the inaudible conversation at the end. So we couldn't hear what Bob whispered to Charlotte. And they say, okay, and that's it. Their voices recovered as it were in silence. So at the end of the scene of the bubble, the detective read the memo from the girl, but the audience couldn't tell what was written on the sheet. So in that sense, I think that this kind of what cannot be said or what cannot be heard directly had this kind of impact at the end in both films. Conversation with the ultimate point of conversion itself inspires further conversation. It is through these multi-layered paradoxes that both Charlotte and the viewer of the film undergo transformation. Such translation already and always operates in the apparently trifling, accidental scenes of the ordinary. So again, I think these two films, I think, make sharp contrast because in the conversation, in Lost in Translation is really ordinary conversation, whereas when you come back to this film, Babel, all those conversations were very sort of, I thought, extraordinary in a way. So that is one point. And probably Kensuke, you want to say later something, something about this conversation without no end. Because Kensuke and I had a sort of conversation over lunchtime about this perfectionist moment, perfectionist process of perfecting something without no end. And then Kensuke sort of expresses concern, but still where this conversation goes. There should be some kind of end state, no? Probably you can say something later, but he sort of expresses concern, this focusing on here and now makes us wonder still where we should go. Where should we go? Then the miracle happens, the miracle that Bob and Charlotte look through each other's eyes. So I thought Bob and Charlotte kind of understood each other, but not in such a way that they sort of really achieved this moment of mutual understanding. Oh, I understand you, you understand me. I thought that what happens at the end is different from kind of mutual, reciprocal understanding of difference. And rather than mutual understanding of different culture, but rather of the understanding of other cultures, others not only outside, but also inside ourselves. This requires an endless endeavor of perfecting one's own culture in encountering the other to keep moving on to the first base. Actually, this is again the quotes from Stanley Cavell's Warden in Tokyo, where he uses this process of understanding other cultures with the metaphor of baseball. How many of you have read this paper, Warden in Tokyo? No one, okay. We couldn't use this, but this is the kind of metaphor which Stanley Cavell uses. Understanding other cultures is not hitting home run, but reach next base one after another. So this implies neither the cosmopolitan fusion of the boundaries of different cultures, which I discussed here, Jan, because we are talking about this, whether this issue is this whole issue of understanding other cultures leads to this kind of cosmopolitan idea, or whether it has put more focus on this re-engagement with one's own cultures. But my view is this is not cosmopolitan. So maybe you can argue against me, but different cultures know the romanticization of the unknowable other. Our home base is continually destabilized and transformed. Philosophy as translation is crucial in language education. So I just want to talk about what is the educational implication of this philosophy as translation. Language education in a kind of broader sense, in that both adult teachers and the young are encouraged to be attuned to the volatile truths of their words. So Paul was asking you this afternoon, what were your childhood experience encountering with different languages? I want to emphasize this point that this re-encounter with language can take place anytime, even after you've grown up. And to doubt and criticize what they have so far believed to be the solid ground of their native language. So translation, as I see, is this continual process of criticizing, especially criticizing your own home base. So last slide, point. The miracle of looking through each other's eye is a gift from the foreign. So in this film, Lost in Translation, the foreign is the foreign land, Japan. As the text of the life of those who have lost their ways, and as the site of the transitory phenomena of separation and remarriage, the film invites the viewer to the experiment of translation. This can be a powerful medium of education for understanding other cultures, education that invites the youth to be radically awakened, self-transformed, to get out of the state of slumber. And I'm making this comment especially with this idea of internationalization, which is being promoted at Kyoto University now. I'm a committee member of the university-wide committee called International Exchange Communication. And there, so much emphasis on internationalization. And what they say is that the young people today should have courage to open up their minds, go outside. But my question is, if majority of the people are in the condition of slumber or in the quiet desperation, how this kind of moment of conversion take place through education? So that is my sort of educational question. And also another thing which I wanted to raise a question is how to use the film in the media as a medium of education. I tried, and I think both I and Paul try to use the film in this course, not in such a way to draw out some kind of moral lesson from the video, but try to see films from different angles by yourselves being translated, by changing our perspective, especially through dialogue, group discussion, the whole class discussion, and probably discussion with your own self. So I hope this 3 days experience of watching the film and discussing them with other people can show you different way of using the film as the medium. So these are the sort of my own.
What do you mean by the state of slumber?
Slumber.
I know the word.
What
What
is
do
slumber?
you?
Slumber means sleep.
I know.
Yeah.
But
So this is related to this Thoreau's phrase, people in a quiet desperation. So probably people feel in a kind of nihilistic way, I don't have anything to say. That's one form of being sleeping or slumber. Well, another people feel probably they have lost their own words. They don't know what to say. And I think that all of us, I mean, including me or you, have this experience of encountering the limit of language. Whether you are in a foreign country or whether even in your own country, when you encounter some huge, massive problems which you feel you can't do anything, maybe you can at a loss. And I would think that is one state of slumber, being slumber.
Could it also be, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it could also be an unawareness. So not that you feel disengaged maybe, but that you're unaware of what you should be thinking about. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Tranquilized kind of life, where you're simply conforming with
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
others do. Yes.
Or blindness. I mean, when you see that, when we saw the film The Battle, there were lots of scenes when people become so blind, and we are talking about this idea of being deaf, cannot hear. And also, I think that what I think is this idea of the slumber is probably related to kind of blindness. By saying this, I don't want to sound to be moralistic, saying that those people who are blind to certain phenomena of the life should open up their eyes or anything like that. But I think that sometimes because we are so familiar, accustomed to a certain mode of thinking, we cannot see things which we could have seen if we change our mode of thinking. So that's one interpretation of being slumber. But this, to me, teaching at the university, this is a very sort of pressing question, because when I teach this idea of growth as growing, ongoing process of growing, perfect yourself, some of the undergraduate students asked me why we have to pursue this sort of challenging process of growth. If you can just stay where you are, get accustomed to the very familiar mode of thinking and way, it's more peaceful, it's more easy. Why do you have to press yourself to open up yourself, keep moving? So if there are those people who are sort of at home in easy state, maybe those of us, I mean, someone like me who feels people should be awakened, consider those people in slumber. But I really don't want to sound moralistic by saying this.
I feel like as Derrida used the term that he's alive as a metronym of the nature of language, like although we all find more ordinary lifestyle in the film Lost in Translation, but Bear's case can also be an extraordinary way to understand the nature of order, although I haven't watched the film yet, that I see. So in order to understand the ordinariness, we don't have to watch the ordinary kinds of film, but also we can get that sense from that extraordinary settings too. That's one point that I want to make. And the other point was this, because we're talking about this to get out of the state of slumber, that I was thinking maybe it's also the way to understand someone in the state of slumber that I want to make. So many teenagers in a state of slumber or kind of like trivialize the way that they are happy, but then sometimes we can easily moralize, put that kind of moral terms in those people, but we can also understand those people in the way that the people who can see the
Like teenagers who are bored, for example?
Yes, I mean, we can also extend, I mean, because we're not just dealing with the teenagers in the state of slumber, but it can also bring us back to see ourselves too. And yes, I mean, like, because this, the sense of having hope or the sense of promise is, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be. I find all those things not in a sense that is obvious sense of hope or promise, but sometimes I found this kind of sense from existentialist novels. And also the experience is not really necessarily from the sense of hope that I easily find from the I'm sorry, I just took one thing.
So it's not a question, it's a
No, I
comment.
just wanted to respond to this, that once we think about to get out of the state of slumber, then I think we once again like cut out the other possibility that how we can understand from the stage. Like because we are talking about the encounter, and we are not just the encounter with the object, but we are also the ones got interpreted by the other. And when we think about this, invites the youth to be radically self-transformed to get out of the state of slumber. I think although you keep emphasizing that it's not about moral judgment on it, but I sense that impossible. Sorry.
Any other comment? Not only to my presentation, but what Paul described about Lost in Translation, or any other comment, because this is a sum-up session. Any questions or? Kensuke, would you like to say something? He has something which he wants to say, but he says he's very frustrated because he cannot express it. So why don't we listen to what Kensuke is thinking about? About what?
I have different things.
How about you talking about this the film, the Babel?
Yeah, we don't have Marvel on my master thesis. So which one you mean?
Just speak something. And a bit louder, please.
I have an impressive thing in the Marvel, and that is the scene of the dance club scene.
The scene of the what, sorry?
That's the dance club scene as a deaf girl experience. And in that scene, we saw the we see that two scenes, and one scene is the dance club noisy scene, and sometimes the silent scene accepts the noisy scene. And in this experience, in this scene, we experience the two perspectives. And we, in the silent scene, we imagine the deaf girl's experience in the dancing, but it seems, for me, it seems very strange experience because the dancing is very noisy, and I cannot imagine why they enjoy in the silent mode in the dance club, and that is very other and strange to me. And I think different way when I sing as usual. But that doesn't mean I understand her idea or her way of thinking. So, but it doesn't mean that there is unknowable other in her. It is a kind of romanticism of unknowable.
So what you're pointing to is coming back to the first the article which we read on the first day, which is Lavisa Levisa's article, which is the untranslatable. In that article, you remember that she's talking about the unknowable other. So I think what Kensuke points to is the danger of romanticizing this unknowable other in connection with the scene from the film Babel.
Yeah,
Is that what you want to say?
Yeah, that is what I want to say. I want to contest the idea that some other persons has some essence that cannot be understood as unknowable, and we have responsibility to understand that, and that makes us that give us an opportunity for transformation. And I think the other in large in the capital is not in ourselves and in the car, but the experience of the gap between our usual scene and the silent scene. The experience of the other in the dance club scene is not expressed in my language, and that cannot be expressed by the deaf girl's language, and that transcends each language, but we can get something from the scene. And I think this is the language in the more broader sense. Yeah.
More developed sense?
More developed sense, or this is not the confusion. The confusion of the
Fusion.
a fusion of the. It is not the fusion because we cannot possess the language
Of the other.
When we see the otherness, that disappears soon. The idea that language is our home is when we the language in the sense that language is our home. When we language in this sense is the gap.
Always carries the gap. language always carries the gap. Is that-
Carry the gap. The gap is language itself, I think. The experience of the gap is the experience of language.
Okay. Any other comments? Do you want to say?
Thank you. Can I say something about you said in Babel?
In
The word is
Babel. Yeah.
Sorry, Babel. You said that there's not much hope in it.
Ah, yeah.
I can see some hope in it.
Oh, please
For
let
the
me know.
example of the Japanese girl.
Yeah.
So many people treat her as a freak, and the dentist treated her very extreme behavior, like someone who is freak and in a way that is like disease, or you just freak.
Yeah.
But the dentist, no, but the detective treat her properly, showing care and understanding, and then also in the end, the father and the daughter finally reaches some kind of communication and translation. This is a good sign, I think, at least in that point. And also in the Mexico family, the American nanny, Amelia, where she was forced to be deported, which is a bad thing on the surface, but in a strange way, she was forced to get back to her family, which I think can be a good thing at the same time. But we do not know. So maybe I think it's not about talking about whether it's good or not, because sometimes the things are beyond the goodness or badness. And also we can see in the film Lost in Translation, they have very proper goodbye, romantic, and fulfills some part of audience psychology. But we do not know what kind of life they will enter, because they will have new problems. They will undergo new transformations, because in the journey of life, we don't know what will happen. So you can see that there is always hope, but you can always see you should also be prepared for something that is not within your expectation and hope. That's what I can say. So although Babel is kind of hopeless, but it's not hopeless. So maybe I can say the theme, very strong theme for Babel, which is also reflected in the last sentence of the film, which is, I think, the line from the director. She said, "The darkest night to my kids, darkest night, the brightest light," which means that the bonds, attachments between the parents and the kids is so strong, which is beyond the cultures, and this maybe is the greatest hope for them. But
Well, could you clarify what you mean by the bond between parents and children are strong?
yeah, so the bond between parents and children, we may have undergone so many misunderstandings, mistranslations, but in the end, I think we're going to find some kind of way to reconcile, to reach some kind of translation and understanding, like the Japanese girl and the father, because
Oh, I
obviously
see.
before that, they don't have any proper understanding. And it is very common, I think, for parents and the kids to have generation gap and misunderstanding, to have a lot of conflicts in the family. But there's something that we are bonded by this blood thing. So,
Blood.
in Chinese, within the blood is always thicker than water, which means that although we do not understand, but well, there's something there, something so strong, because something which is called love, which is so strong and powerful, which sometimes conquers everything. But well, I carried away. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I carried
No, that's
away.
okay, but I'm interested in what you mean by
The bond.
the bond
Yeah.
bound by blood.
Between your
No, I understand, but
But in families, we say that we have a blood connection. Like we share the same blood because as
yeah.
but don't you think that sort of contradicts with what we read about Derrida, about the idea of home and this sense of separation from home.
Well, that is a Derrida's home is a spiritual home.
But don't you think Derrida doesn't have home in the sense which you have just described?
But obviously, he has a father and a mother. That's what I mean by the blood connections.
Anyone wants to say something? I feel about this father and blood. You want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say something. Because I said something you said about some universal humanity. I think you want to resist something like that. But through these two films, I feel something still there, just like she said about the blood, the bond, or I think there are something still there for the universal value or universal how to say that. So I just wonder how do you resist the cultural relativism?
How do I think Derrida does? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but both. I want to ask both questions.